Thank you all for coming, and welcome to the Library Research Awards for 2025. I'm really excited to announce all of our awardees to you and have them present on their research. Several of them will be a little late, so we'll see if all 11 show up, but I am hopeful that we will make this happen. Before we begin our award presentations, I would like to take a moment to honor the life and legacy of Walter Donald Boyles. As the namesake for two of our awards, the W. Donald Bowles Awards, his work in wealth inequality and economic disparity has left an indelible mark on the AU community. Professor Emeritus Bowles was a beacon of knowledge, a mentor to many, and an inspiration to all who had the privilege of knowing him. Professor Bowles dedicated his life to the pursuit of knowledge and the betterment of his students. His passion for economics was evident in every lecture, every research paper, and every interaction he had with his colleagues and students. After earning his PhD from Columbia University, he embarked on a distinguished 37-year career at American University, where he specialized in Soviet and Russian economics. He was appointed Professor Emeritus of Economics at American University in 1993, and his leadership qualities were recognized by the Marquis Biographies publisher and with the Albert Nelson Marquis Lifetime Achievement Award in 2018. During his time at AU, he served as chair of the Department of Economics, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and Vice President of Academic Affairs, demonstrating his commitment to academic excellence and leadership. His contributions extended beyond academia, including his role as field supervisor of American University's African Seminar, his participation in Symposia on World Development in Moscow, and numerous other professional endeavors and achievements. Professor Bowles' passion for understanding and finding solutions to worldwide poverty lives on with his legacy at AU. To encourage further study into these economic disparities, he established undergraduate and graduate funds to be awarded by the University Library to students who performed research in areas related to Professor Bowles' field of focus. Beyond his professional achievements, Professor Bowles was a devoted husband, a loving father, and a wonderful grandfather. His kindness, intelligence, and unceasing curiosity about the human condition will be dearly missed. As we celebrate the achievements of today's award recipients, let us also celebrate the life of Professor Walter Donald Boyles. His spirit of excellence, dedication, and compassion continues to inspire us all. We are grateful for his contributions and honored to carry forward his legacy through these awards. So with that, I have just a few thank yous and then we'll get started. There are a lot of people that have to come together to make these awards happen. I'd like to thank our committee chairs, who you'll be hearing from, Clarissa, Katie, Sarah, and Melissa, who guided the evaluation process to award these finalists, the awardees, as well as the committee members who participated in a lot of deliberation and frank and honest exchange of thoughts to arrive at these conclusions. I'd like to thank our AV members, Ben and Eric, who's in the back, making sure that this is recorded, as well as available to those who are on Zoom today. I'd also like to thank G, our university librarian, for supporting this award and making it all possible. And finally, to all of the students, as well as the faculty who supported every single application. We had an unprecedented number of applications this year, and it's a wonderful tribute to the level of research and quality thinking, writing, and research that's happening at AU. So thank you, everyone. Let's do a little round of applause. And with that, you can see we have 11 awards that are going to be presented today. I'm going to pass it off to talk about the Best Writing Studies Awards.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Clarissa Eisen. I was the chair of the Best Undergraduate Writing Studies Award. All first-year students at American University must take a sequence of 2 writing classes in their first fall and spring semesters. These classes are intended to teach introductory level of writing and research skills in their research so that they can transfer to all the other classes they take while they're here. The Best Undergraduate Writing Studies Awards are presented to students who show amazing skills in their research habits, resource usage, evidence of learning, and of course, high quality writing. So with that, Owen McCloskey's paper is third place. The urgent need, do I tap? Here we go. Paper, the urgent need to address poor management as a precursor to quiet quitting in the hospitality industry. Impressed the committee with its meticulous conclusions made based on careful interaction and reflection with the sources. We also appreciated his citation tracing strategy that followed the scholarly conversation between sources. And by the end of this essay, one reviewer wanted to have a conversation with him, to argue with him. And we thought this was an excellent sign that the researcher went out on a limb and made their own interpretations. So for that reason, the committee is pleased to award Owen McCloskey with the third place prize for the best writing studies paper.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the library for coming here today. I'm honored to present my research and discuss my research and how the library really enabled the project. My research really focused on quiet quitting and specifically its unique role within the hospitality industry, which is pretty notorious for its poor working conditions and overworking its employees, many of which are immigrants or in other situations where they're forced to take lower paying positions. As such, the business model in the hospitality industry really enables exploitation, and the ethos often relies on the idea that going above and beyond is itself the bare minimum. And quiet quitting, which is the embrace of doing that bare minimum, is an extremely consequential response. Through my research, I found that while scholars found many individual reasons for why individuals in the hospitality industry may begin to engage in quiet quitting activities, these varying conclusions are not as competing as they would seem. Nearly all of them can be traced back in some way towards the role management has to play, which is why I said that is the ultimate causality. American University's library was instrumental in making this project just doable. I obviously relied on all the databases or many of the databases the university was able to provide, and I especially want to point out the interlibrary loan, which ultimately made the project possible. Since I was tracing a lot of the academic conversation through citations, some of the articles I came across may have not been available on the database. But through the interlibrary loan, it was I was able to access them nearly immediately, which without that ability, I would not have been able to complete the project with the research required. I would finally just like to acknowledge Professor Muma for their guidance throughout the course. They have been an extremely helpful mentor and just extremely good person. My peers within that class, several of us were given the task of writing about quiet quitting. So throughout the semester, we were bouncing off ideas about possible research directions we could go through, and certain sources we could find, all of which helped develop, I feel like, all of our writing and research skills. And of course, I wanted to give another big thank you to the American University Library staff, especially research librarians who were able to make this research possible.
All right, thank you for that. Next, we want to award William Palmer for their paper, A Trick Question, How Germany's Free Higher Education Reveals Superior Solutions for the United States to Adopt. This paper impressed the committee with its even-handed comparison of the two different higher education systems, Germany and the United States. The research strategy was clearly intentional, and the author's interactions with sources were quite sophisticated for a first-year writer. And so, for his thorough research and excellent writing, the committee is pleased to award William Palmer with the second-place prize for Best Writing Studies paper.
Hello everyone, my name is Will Palmer, and I am very grateful and thankful to be awarded for this second place award. And thank you for everybody who's been a process in this. I'd like to thank my professor, Kate Wilson. It was really awesome to be a part of this, and I'm really happy that I was able to conduct this actual research project. One of the things I want to start out with is what I'm majoring in, because it is relevant. So I'm an economics and CLEG, so communications, legal studies, economics, and government major. And those two things are relevant because effectively they define my topic and define why I was interested. Because in very broad terms, my topic, as we've already talked about, is like the economic impact of these educational policies between these two countries. The one part that those two majors don't really reflect is the educational piece, which wasn't even like entirely part of the assignment. The assignment was called Looking for Trouble, where we were trying to find issues or problems in society and then understanding the research and data around those said issues. Me, as a college student who has to pay tuition at the end of the year, thinks that really high tuition can be a bit of a problem of sometimes, especially when compared to a country like Germany that has no tuition. They have free college. So the first thing I wanted to understand is why that's the case. What are the positives and the negatives of those two systems, and would it be possible for that system to be ported over to the United States? But the second thing was that education is also really interesting. A lot of us here are very much so involved in it, but it's something that can shape social mobility, our career growth, our interactions, how we vote, among numerous other things. And as somebody who's been in the system for almost all 19 years of my life, I wanted to understand more about it, the policy, the impacts, and things like that. So with those two reasons, I kind of defined where I wanted to take my research. The big problem was that I knew nothing about these topics. I had thrown myself into a rabbit hole that, again, I was completely clueless about, so I really didn't have a clear thesis or even a research question to go off. That was until we really started talking about this in class, particularly focusing at the start on popular sources, which I knew would be really critical, because I needed to learn about this topic, and this was one of the easiest, fastest, and most efficient ways to do this. I would get very basic information, and even especially recent information, things that reflected the public belief and opinion on these issues and the overall debates, which would not only be important for me to begin learning about this, but also because I could include them in my paper as sources that might not be as easily found within other scholarly sources. Nonetheless, I still needed scholarly sources, and I still didn't know how to get them until a librarian came and spoke to our class. And critically, the librarian talked about databases like Nexus Uni, ProQuest, and American Search Premier, all of which were really important to actually collect the data I needed. We talked about string search filters as well as date filtering to actually locate the niche topics that I would be able to use within my research paper. But probably the most helpful thing that the librarian advised us on was how to sift through these papers and journals themselves. How to find the tables, the articles, and the sections that would actually be useful to my research paper, because again, it was really niche, and I would only be able to pull small sections or potentially even just sentences from each of my major scholarly sources. So I needed to be able to find those quickly, and without this approach and without this advisement and these skills, I don't think I would have been able to complete this research project at all. So I'm really grateful that the librarian was able to come in and teach us those skills so early on in the process. Now, for my results, they're kind of unsurprising, which is this idea that because Germany's system is so unique, there's a history around it, and ultimately their educational structure is a lot different than America. People go to college at different times for different things and pay different amounts of money. You can't really just look at that and say, let's put free college in America. So, the alternative that I researched and kind of proposed was the idea of a more comprehensive student loan forgiveness process, something that accounted not just socioeconomic need, but also took into account the earnings and wages of students after they graduated. By understanding this, we would have a more comprehensive need program that was also cheaper and would be able to adjust and fit with more of the United States educational system. This would be a system tailored toward making college more accessible within the United States based on the very system that we have and live in here. Overall, though, those were just my tangible results, and my personal results was that I learned a lot. I learned a lot about these issues that are really interesting and that directly affect me, and going forward, I learned how to learn better. I learned how to conduct this research, and I think in my next 3 years here, I hope I'm able to use a lot of those skills and knowledge to continue learning, to continue conducting research, and to continue writing papers like this. Thank you.
Thank you. And first place, Brianna Jimenez's paper, How Terror Management Theory Reversed Cancel Culture Postmortem, The Case of Liam Payne. This paper does it all. There's evidence of lateral reading, finding specific databases, reading theory, finding primary sources, analyzing, synthesizing, and using meta-commentary to establish ethos. It has everything, and all of this stems from a sophisticated and rigorous research process. An incredibly accomplished paper that seriously impressed the reviewers. So for all of these reasons, the committee is pleased to award Brianna Jimenez with the first place prize for Best Writing Studies paper.
Hi everyone, my name is Brianna Jimenez. I'm a first-year student here, and my paper is How Terror Management Theory Reversed Cancel Culture Postmortem, The Case of Liam Payne. I know what you're thinking. What is even going on here? Okay, so for some context, the assignment outline was to apply a theoretical framework to a pop culture event in order to see it through a different lens. And so for my pop culture event, I'm a pop culture fanatic. I thought that would be the easiest way to start. So I chose Liam Payne. And so Liam Payne is a former member of One Direction. He was a super huge star, and he died late last year. But before his death, he was getting canceled online. Fans who had been long-term since like the 2010s were turning on him, calling him a lot of negative things, trying to deplatform him as a musician. But after his death, there was a complete shift in this, where fans were trying to uplift him, honor him, and then the people who were formerly like down-talking him were getting attacked by the fans, saying like, why would you talk about him post-death like this? And so I wanted to apply theoretical frameworks, terror management theory, which is how we cope with death, and social identity theory, which is how we formulate groups. So from terror management theory, I took the main concept of mortality salience, which is the awareness that death is inevitable and often leads to this existential anxiety, and how do people cope with it. So for that coping aspect, I turned to social identity theory, and for in-groups and out-groups, which is how groups are either they're together, there's a lot of solidarity, or the out-group, there's a lot of tension between these two groups, which often leads to a lot of conflict. So I could not have done this without the library. And so this paper was not only an introduction to the databases here at the library, but also to the library itself. I'm a first-year student. This was my first time ever engaging with the library, and I come from a high school that didn't have a lot of access to databases and things like that. So I was blown away and honestly a little intimidated by the amount of resources available. And so the database navigation and source credibility were just two things that were talked about whenever the librarians came to talk to my class. And this was really helpful because scholarly articles, man, that's like really intense and a lot of pages. So I really needed help like understanding, okay, how can I break this down? How can I find and pick the credible pieces from it? And also learn about other scholars who are in this conversation. So the power of the library. So first I'm going to start with the live chat with the librarian. Saved my life, I will say. Like I said, I'm new to the databases. There's an abundant amount of databases in the collection. And so I was talking with the librarians, okay, well, I'm trying to look for something that has more comms or more pop culture, more media. What databases would be good for this? And they were recommending Project Muse and the SSRNE library. So like super helpful for me to really talk like, there's a lot of databases, but what is good for my paper? And this not only helped me explore different databases, but also dive into those databases specifically. And then obviously the A to Z database, saved my life. This was like where I was really able to dive into like what could make my paper elevated. And so the library was super crucial in not only helping me identify the databases, but also reading and sifting through the sources, understanding what is credible, who's in this conversation, what can I pull from this, and also navigating the intense text that is an academic paper. So where did this research take me? So I took the theoretical framework, and through reading all my academic sources from the library, exposure to mortality salience, which is again the idea that we're going to die, leads to an increase in in-group solidarity, and exposure to mortality salience and in-group solidarity often leads to out-group tension and conflict. And so this led me to establishing the question of how does death change and strengthen the direction of in-group and out-group dynamics? And I wanted to apply this through the case of Liam Payne. So the application. So exploring the in-group and out-group dynamics pre and post his death is how I approached the application. So I explored before his death, how did the in-group and out-group dynamics look? The in-group was very obviously trying to deplatform him, talking bad about him, whereas the out-group was trying to protect his image, advocate for him. However, post-death, there was a complete flip of these groups. The in-group then became the people who were protecting him, trying to elevate his image, whereas the out-group became the people who were still trying to deplatform him, and there was a lot of conflict through that. And that obviously changed the public perception. And so this really led me to, although I did analyze the two groups, it led me to the need for more research. What it allowed terror management theory and in-group and social identity theory to allow for this huge shift in ideas, because it was a really stark contrast. And so that's what I called for at the end of my paper. And so I want to give a huge thank you to the library, the librarian staff. I was talking before, saved my life. But shout out to the librarian and the staff, as well as Cynthia Bear Van Dam, my professor, who was a great resource throughout this and really pushed me to apply for this. So thank you all very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Becker, and I'm chairing the Best Undergraduate Paper Research Award. This award is available to all undergraduate students, and they can submit any paper from any class on any subject. This year, the committee had many outstanding research papers to choose from. It's just so exciting, the breadth and depth of the research that our undergraduates are doing. It was a tough decision for the committee. Nevertheless, 3 papers rose to the top of our list and became our winners, and we are delighted to honor these students today. I'm going to start with Emmy Richards, our 3rd place winner. Emmy did a brilliant job of analyzing the success of an activist art movement in Cuba, using as a foundation 2 theoretical works related to nonviolent resistance. She used library resources at many points in her project, from identifying the specific movement she would study, to developing her theoretical framework, to collecting evidence and synthesizing her findings. The committee found her argument highly original, and the growth she exhibited as a researcher quite exceptional. The faculty recommendation put the paper among the top, quote unquote, among the top 3 to 4 most original, in-depth, well-researched, and intellectually curious undergraduate papers that I've encountered over the past 5 years. I'd like to call Emmy up to the podium to tell us more about her paper.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. First of all, I really appreciate this. My research project is titled Cuba's Movimiento San Isidro, the Imbrication of Art and Pragmatism in Nonviolent Resistance as a Path to Peace. So as a bit of context, Movimiento San Isidro, or MSI, was formed by a group of artists, journalists, and academics in 2018 to challenge the Cuban government's increased censorship of expression. So as a single case study that connects Jean-Paul Lederach's theory of the moral imagination, 2 theories on pragmatic nonviolent resistance, my investigation explores why MSI has employed artistic tactics of nonviolent resistance and how these tactics have been effective in imagining a peaceful Cuban society. So in all, I find that as an artistic collective organizing to combat censorship through a combination of art and pragmatism, MSI is foundationally suffused with relationality, paradoxical curiosity, creativity, and an acceptance of risk, which articulate to garner attention for the cause, bolster participation and support both domestically and abroad, communicate cohesive objectives, and pressure for change by way of a visceral appeal to humanity. Thus, I conclude that the centering of art in a nonviolent resistance movement alongside pragmatic tactics serves to promote comprehensive peace building. The library tools, instruction, and resources I utilized in completing my project proved paramount to my ability to formulate my research question, consolidate background information, develop a theoretical framework, compile evidence, and contextualize my findings. The library search engine enabled me to home in on a specific topic and pose a question to investigate. I knew to capitalize on particular search techniques to focus my findings thanks to a research project training I received from one of the librarians. And I largely engaged with the framework put forth by John Paul Lederach in The Moral Imagination, The Art and Soul of Building Peace, which was a book I was able to borrow from the Washington College of Law through the Library Consortium. The other text that formed the theoretical foundation of my study was Why Civil Resistance Works, The Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict, written by Erica Chenoweth and Maria J. Steffen, and that was available online through the library catalog, so I spent many hours combing this ebook by way of university resources. Thus, placing these texts in conversation with one another allowed me to explore a framework of nonviolent resistance that accounts for the power of art and traditional pragmatic tactics in contributing to the success of the movement. I continued to use the library catalog to find background materials on contemporary Cuban political conflicts and resistance, as well as historical texts dealing with the Cuban Revolution and its aftermath. I compiled my evidence by searching the library's online newsletter article reserves, inputting activist names, dates, and protests, and thus acquiring the sources published in the last couple of years to really help me explore the imbrication between art and pragmatism in MSI. Crucially, these resources helped me to circumvent some of the very censorship that MSI works to resist, so I was really happy that I had this plethora of material despite that. So in all, the library served a significant role in developing my ability to celebrate the relationship between art and pragmatism as a path to a more promising peace.
Thank you. Still on. Okay, our second place winner is Chi Feng, who completed this paper as a history capstone project. The paper not only resets the timeline for environmentalism in China, demonstrating that it started much earlier than generally thought, but also helps us to understand regional operators within the Maoist regime. The committee agrees with Chi's faculty member, who says Chi's ability to draw connections between local and national dynamics in environmental conservation sets this work apart as an important scholarly achievement. As you can imagine, Chi had to get creative in compiling evidence for this paper, as access to government records in Chinese archives is highly restricted. With the advice of faculty mentor and the Humanities and Social Sciences librarian Stella Hudson, Chi was able to overcome this challenge to find effective primary sources. Let's hear more from Chi about this project.
Thanks so much for coming. So it's actually an honor to stand here to share my research, basically. And so basically my subject was talking about the early Chinese involvement history. And the thesis was named the Garden of the Empire and reimagining the origins, the origins of Chinese environmentalism on Dinghu Mountain Natural Reserve, which was the first natural reserve was established by a local botanist named Wang Yongchen in 1956. And so basically the entire paper is contributed to examination of the origins of Chinese environmentalism, asserting that it emerged primarily through regional autonomies and localized cultural practices and proactive regional actors, rather than being centralized, driven, or influenced chiefly by the international diplomacy. And the thesis basically challenges the prevailing narrative of a unilateral, top-down approach from the central government, instead illuminating the critical roles of regional institutions and individuals played in actively shaping environmental policies between the 1949 to 1972. And which basically demonstrated by the establishment and the development of the Dinghu Mountain Natural Reserve. So, as you might see, for anyone who knows about doing studies on East Asia, typically early Chinese history, then knowing that the early modern Chinese history, knowing that getting access to sources are extremely difficult. So initially, I actually have to take a vast amount of time basically consulting with the librarian staff for accessing any potential sources. And there are actually there was initially I used the library online consultation service to basically resolve my initial questions. And the immediate response not only provide me with like initial important historical infos, but also laid the solid foundations for my research. And which under the guidance, I began to like make my in-depth inquiries using the collections of the Harvard from the Arnold. Oh, I'm sorry. From the from the archive of the Harvard University and the South China Botanical Research Institute and Yonsei University, as began to obtain like valuable administrative documents and scholarly memoirs and also conference proceedings. And these materials eventually converged like a trickle of water, like from the West River, like to form the West River in my paper. And I'm particularly grateful for the library staff, especially Miss like Stella Hassan, and who's not only taught me the skill of searching keywords or like find with precision or slicing like main part of content, but also guide me through to make use of local and international databases to open the treasures of materials that would otherwise inaccessible to me. So this process made me realize that the library is not only preserving knowledge, but also nurturing the ancestral spirit of the seekers. And I'd also like to express my deepest gratitude to Dr. Wester, who's over there, and my capstone mentor, Professor Justin Jacob, who's not here today, and for your guidance and the general support on my academic career. I am grateful for you because your guidance that of your guidance that I have been able to face the immensity of history and the unknown of research with a greater maturity and rigors. And for me, the library is not only a place for consulting materials, but also a place where I can dialogue with history and make a pact with the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jean. All right. Our first place winner our first place winner literally developed a showstopper of a project that crosses disciplines and media types to delve into the experiences of women and communities during the partition in India. Serena Govindaya, an honors student in AU and SIS, combined a quantitative study of social science data from the library's subscription to the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research with detailed analysis of representations of violence against women in partition-era films to produce both a fascinating research paper and a video essay. She also, as her faculty mentor points out, has shown herself to be adept in engaging and synthesizing scholarly secondary sources from very different disciplines. Serena's conclusions break new ground in providing a holistic look at how partition changed over time, both politically and culturally. The committee was blown away by the complexity and magnitude of this project and by how Serena brought everything together to make her compelling argument. I would like to invite Serena to tell us more about this research.
Hi everybody, this is my presentation on Screening Partition, Violence Against Women in Partition Films and its Intersection with Communal Violence from 1970 to 1999. So my research question was whether and how has violence against women in films of the partition interacted with communal violence in India from 1970 to 1999. The partition occurred on the night of August 14th, 1947, displacing over 10 million people, making it the largest documented displacement in history. And this had not only massive cultural implications, splitting India and Pakistan into what they are today, but also massive political implications. So my first step in my research was grounding my cultural analysis in quantitative numbers. I used a Varshini Wilkinson data set on Hindu-Muslim violence in India from 1950 to 1999, specifically the reported cause and killed category. I completed a trend analysis to understand how trends in these categories changed over time. This data set is the premier data set on violence in the South Asian region. This data set was not only crucial to completing my research, but also the most important part of my research, in my opinion, and I was able to access this through the AU library. So as for my data set findings, what I found, and you'll see two of my pie charts looking at the reported cause category from 1990 to 1992, and 1993 to 1995, what you see is desecration of religious sites, mosques specifically, is the largest cause of violence between 1990 to 1992. This was really prominent because of the destruction of the Babri Masjid occurring in December 1992, which this mosque was over 400 years old, was violently taken over by Hindu nationalists and destroyed. What you see is there were 224 instances of violence in this 3-year period. However, in 1993 to 1995, you see this drop to only 41. You also see previous communal violence, public rituals and festivities, and private quarrels becoming more prominent. This significant shift is like a very interesting finding, and when put in tandem with my cultural analysis, it outlines why December 1992 was so critical. So I decided to also complete a cultural analysis of partition era films on the partition. What you'll see are my 7 films here. I would not have been able to access these films without access to Canopy and AU's media library. I have 7 of the films here that I picked based on my selection criteria. I have 3 films from pre-December 1992 and 4 from post-December 1992. I decided to analyze these films through the lens of violence against women on an ideological and national cinema scope. So I used the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women to help define the way I was defining violence against women. And these were the 6 prominent themes I pulled out from my 7 films. What you'll see is that violence is not only physical, but psychological in nature. So I decided to make a video essay, and the reason I decided to make a video essay is because film is a visual medium, and when you're looking at something like violence against women, which is so salient within the films, you do not want to explain it, you want to show it, because that is ultimately what the viewer of the films is watching, and it does a disservice to talk about these films but to not actually show what I'm talking about. So this is a QR code to my video essay. Yeah. So for my film findings, what I found is that my 3 pre-December 1992 films had 3 primary themes: forcible displacement from the home, being forced and led to suicide, and feelings of failure. These films portray violence as much more psychological in nature. However, my post-December 1992 films add upon those, demonstrating kidnapping and sexual assault, physical violence, and forced marriage. So what you see is violence not only became more varied, but it also became more graphic. And I attribute this change to looking at December 1992 as a critical juncture, where violence almost hit a critical mass within actual society, and because of that, it infiltrated the cultural realm as well. So you see violence decreasing in actual society, but becoming much more prominent within the cultural realm with the films that I looked at. And lastly, I just want to say thank you so much to my faculty mentor, Professor Lena Jaiswal, and to my capstone professor, Dr. Robert Adcock. This project would not have happened without the support of both of them. And thank you so much to the library for providing all the resources that I used to help make this research possible. Thank you.
I'm Katie Hutt. I am the Business and Economics Librarian at AU, and I was the chair of the Bowles Committee. So our committee looked at papers submitted for the Bowles Award, which was endowed by the late Professor Emeritus Walter Donald Bowles, as Rachel mentioned. The papers submitted for this award were to reflect Dr. Bowles' interest in wealth inequality, poverty, and other topics related to the consequences of economic disparities. Students may have explored these topics within a course in any subject area. And I'm pleased to present Connor Rempe with the Donald Bowles Award for undergraduates. And I should mention also, in this category, there's just one undergraduate winner and one graduate winner. Connor's paper, The Impact of Walkability on the effectiveness of small business grants in Washington, D.C., impressed the evaluators in the way that he attempted to answer a research question about which very little had been written heretofore. That is, whether small business grants are more effective in neighborhoods with a high walkability rating. And as cities look to bring in new businesses, to revitalize neighborhoods that may have been hit hard by COVID area vacancies, this is an important question. Connor's faculty sponsor, Professor Evan Glass, noted in his recommendation that Connor took considerable effort to scrape the data from DC's tax authority, which as you can imagine is no easy feat. And similarly, the evaluators were all impressed with the array of research resources on which Connor leaned to produce his paper, including scholarly articles, government websites, using search language, using gel codes, which the economists among us will recognize, citation mining, to effectively search databases and AU's holdings. We all noted the degree of learning about the research process that Connor seemed to undertake throughout the process of writing the paper, which is one of the many reasons that I'm so pleased to present Connor to discuss his paper. Congratulations.
Hi, everyone. So first, a huge thank you to the library and to Ms. Hutt for all of her support throughout this entire paper, and to Professor Kraft. This is my second class with Professor Kraft and my third time interacting with him if you count the Fed Challenge back in freshman year. So we go way back, and it's been a pleasure to work with him throughout this time. So yeah, as Ms. Hutt said, I wrote this paper for my senior capstone project. And I think one of the most daunting things about that project is you show up on the first day of class and they say, okay, write something. And that is a really kind of crazy place to start with the blank page. And this is where the library came in right away, is the economics librarian maintains a fantastic database worth of just like data sources, because that's one of the big things in economic research is you're very much limited by what data is available to you. And I'm a kind of mathematician outside of my economics work, so I really wanted to have a very solid quantitative element to my project. So I went straight to that database and looked to see what data would be available to me to get some sort of inspiration for this project. And there I was able to find a database called Open Data DC, where basically the local government of Washington, D.C. maintains a repository of various data sets related to any sort of kind of public projects that they've undertaken recently. This really appealed to me. This, at the time, I thought, you know what, this might be my last year in Washington, D.C. It would be really great to do a very local focused project. So I kind of went combing through this archive to see if there were any projects that spoke to me. And the one I came along was a small business grant program called the Great Streets Grant Program. And that's a kind of neighborhood revitalization project where businesses along any sort of, they call it a Great Streets corridor, so think Connecticut Ave, Wisconsin Ave, any of the kind of big main streets in Washington, D.C., can apply for a grant to basically revitalize the front of their business. So it's very much for infrastructure upgrades or facelift sort of programming. I thought, okay, well that's cool. Is there any way that I can pair this with, I've had the chance to do some work previously with kind of built environment research and looking at how like pedestrian-friendly architecture promotes economic activity. So is there any way I can pair these two together? So yeah, as the title says, I tried to look at whether or not these grants are more effective in more walkable neighborhoods. And as Ms. Hutt pointed out, that's not something that has a lot of research previously. There's a pretty solid amount of research on just like walkability and residential real estate values, and there's a pretty solid amount of research on business grants and how those affect businesses, but kind of in the middle, there's not much going on. So yeah, as was noted in the kind of talk before this, I was able to, with the help of a great talk from Ms. Hutt that I think we all kind of received a librarian talk, which I think we've all noted was very, very helpful, utilize these things called gel codes, which are for the Journal of Economic Literature, basically mark what kind of subset of economics each paper is on. And those are really helpful to say, okay, I've found one paper that kind of relates to my subject. Now can I find maybe like 2 to 3 more? And then also utilizing the library database has a fantastic tool to follow citation paths, and utilizing that to kind of just really scrape as much research as I possibly could to have a solid scholarly framework from which to build my project. After that, I then faced a data problem. Again, I had to interact with the DC MyTax office, which wrote a quick little script so that I could just kind of turn it on and it would web scrape the data, and I wouldn't have to go through and search every address I was interested in for these businesses, which was fantastic. And ultimately, was able to kind of run some models and run some regression results that were certainly inconclusive at best. I think would this have been a PhD thesis project, I would have absolutely taken 3 years in the data collection phase and looked to find better indicators of business success, better variables that I could have used to measure grant success. But I think ultimately, and I think other awardees have spoken about this, the biggest takeaway was I learned a lot about the research process. I learned how to conduct scholarly work, how to marry quantitative and qualitative sources to produce a product that I'm really proud of. And yeah, I hope to continue looking into it. Thank you.
Right. And then for our graduate winner, I'm pleased to announce Ari Lippi as the W. Donald Bowles Award winner for graduate students. Ari's paper, Superstorm Sandy, a study of New York City and coastal corralling, looked at the history of coastal corralling in New York City, which is the practice, and they'll get into this much more, but the practice of clustering public housing in low-lying areas in the city, and how this contributed to the devastation wrought by Superstorm Sandy. So as someone who lived in New York during the storm, I can tell you that this balance was extremely evident in the aftermath of the storm, when the wealthier, high-lying areas of the city emerged more or less unscathed, while poorer, low-lying neighborhoods struggled mightily, and as I learned in reading Ari's paper, continue to struggle and recover this day, to this day. In this way, Ari's paper truly embodied the spirit of the Bowles Award. Ari's faculty recommendation noted that Ari transformed their original paper into a publishable article, which has subsequently been accepted by the Journal of Public and International Affairs. And on the research side, the evaluators noted Ari's use of a variety of scholarly and government sources, including meeting with their subject liaison, Sarah Gilchrist, and using actual books. In addition, Ari learned how to use Zotero, which is a citation management tool that can make the writing and research process, as those of us who use it know, much more efficient. Ari's passion for researching this topic really came through in their paper, which was a pleasure to read, and I'm so pleased to present Ari to discuss their paper.
Hi everyone. Sorry I'm a little bit out of breath and sweaty. But yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm really pleased to talk about my paper. There we go. Show of hands, was anyone in this room affected by Hurricane Sandy? A few, okay. And does anyone else remember any details about the storm, whether you were affected or not? Most people, okay, great. I asked because this was a life-altering incident for tens of thousands of people in New York City alone, but along the whole of the East Coast. But it seems to have significantly faded in the collective memory from what I've found. And for those who didn't raise their hands, on October 29th, 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit New York City and other parts of the East Coast, as I mentioned, and I call it New York City's first worst storm of the 21st century. Next to Katrina, this was the costliest storm in U.S. history and one of the worst storms New York City has ever faced. Just in New York City alone, it was $19 billion in damage, 43 deaths, and a total blackout and loss of heat for around 2 million people. And this was extremely significant because days after the storm, there was a nor'easter snowstorm. And so while the impacts were widespread, the neighborhoods of Coney Island and the Rockaways experienced widely disparate impacts, which magnified underlying social vulnerabilities among low-income, racialized, and ethnicized populations. My research question is, why were some of the most economically vulnerable people on some of the most environmentally vulnerable lands of Coney Island and the Rockaways at the time of Sandy, and what injustices were engendered as a result? My argument is that nearly a century's worth of New York City planners and policymakers and political elite gradually foreclosed residential opportunities for low-income, racialized, and ethnicized groups from the city center and corralled them into areas of neglect and undesirability on the shore. They did this in arguably four phases, and I'll explain the last one in other slides. My methods, as were mentioned, was collecting archival sources, reading books, and then visualization of coastal corralling through GIS mapping and graphic representation. And in terms of my theoretical framework, I used a vulnerability analysis lens, thanks to Jessie Rabeau, who is a professor here, and process tracing methods as outlined by David Collier for social sciences. For spatial reference, here are the neighborhoods of Coney Island and the Rockaway Peninsula, and you can see how flooding particularly impacted these neighborhoods. This was a map I made on GIS using publicly available data. And so I call this process coastal corralling, where the government gradually foreclosed those opportunities and moved them further and further into circumferential areas. So using archives, I sketched out some of the spatial patterns I noticed through my research. I identified a main tool of this geographic and urban development restructuring is a section in the Fair Housing Act of 1949 called Title I, which gave municipalities federal funding for slum clearance. And in its implementation, it was a enforcement of de facto segregation. So this is a rough sketch that I made for visual purposes, but here I'm theorizing that slum clearance gradually corralled people from the profitable areas into peripheral and devalued and abandoned lands throughout the 20th century. And on the left, you can see a map that's an archival map from the New York City charts and maps prepared by the Slum Clearance Committee of New York City from 1933 to 34. And in those areas were all areas identified for slum clearance based on metrics of people of color, income, disease, and immigrant status. And over time, these areas were demolished, people were displaced, and then more affordable housing opportunities became available in Coney Island and the Rockaways as outlined there. One more minute. Okay, I'm gonna skip this one then. So why this matters is because Sandy was horribly devastating for these areas. And in New York City altogether, only 12.5% of the population was impacted. Coney Island, 99%. Rockaways, 86%. And at least 20,000 in Coney Island and the Rockaways, 20,000 units are NYCHA housing. So all NYCHA buildings on the shore were affected. As you can see here, these are the clusters of NYCHA housing. And people lacked food, water, electricity, medical attention, and especially heat because it knocked out boilers in these buildings up until this day. People suffer from heat loss up until this day. I believe there's a large gap in reporting on this, but I believe it is because a lot of them are still temporary boilers, which are legally only supposed to be there for less than a year. So why this matters now, is because of the recently passed City of Yes plan. This is a massive rezoning effort that is prepared to drastically alter the residential landscape of the city. It proposes to add over 8,000 affordable housing units across the city, and thousands of them in these two areas of Coney Island and the Rockaway, specifically around NYCHA housing. So thank you so much to AU Library. Thank you to Sarah Burns-Gilchrist, my advisor, Dr. Malini Raghunathan, Dr. Ken Konka, Dr. Jessie Rabeau, and you. And here is the QR code to my published article if you'd like to give it a click or even read. Thank you.
What a great way to segue into the graduate awards. Thank you so much. I'm glad that. Sorry. There we go. So I'm Sarah Gilchrist. I am the graduate studies librarian primarily for the School of Public Affairs and School of International Service. So I work also with first year writing students, and I get to see students from a lot of different disciplinary areas. I was really excited about the Best Graduate Library Research Award because this is a new award and we wanted to make sure that we could recognize the efforts of our graduate students. And we had some amazing submissions for this first year. We had a panel of 4 faculty that looked at this award, including Dr. Bass, Dr. Breen, and Dr. DeCour. And we had a lot of discussions about how great the quality was for our library research, for the graduate research for this library award. And ultimately, we chose 2 papers for this award because we noticed that there was a very excellent set. There were a set of several papers that we wanted to award, but we could only pick 2, and we decided to pick one at the doctoral level and one at the master's degree level. So to start with the Best Graduate Paper Award for the master's degree, we have Salman Hook's paper on resolving the Rohingya crisis, pathways to repatriation. And graduate research is always at a very high quality from what I've seen at this university, but this stood out because of its use of 131 cited sources, where I see that. 52 were from journal articles and 23 were from books, and a good synthesis of the citations in their paper. So not only were these things cited, but the research was synthesized in a way that presented new information. There was a positionality statement, and the methodology of this paper really made it stand out from the rest of the papers that we received. The research habits that were at the crux of how we chose the finalists for this award included using very specific databases and talking about that in their statement, using Boolean logic, which is music to any librarian's ears, but also meeting with librarians and using our subject guides. So this paper stood out for both the research, but also for the methods that they produced. So is Samin here? If not,
Looks like they would be running late, so
then
possibly a little later than expected.
maybe we can move ahead to our next winner, and Rita Hamid, who is joining us virtually, is winning the best graduate paper award at the doctoral level for their paper called Clearing the Air: How Pollution and Policy Shape Labor Supply in Bangladesh. And again, this was a graduate paper that was of such high quality that we had a hard time deciding which paper to choose, but this one stood out because of using specific data resources and doing original research with those data resources. But those included visiting with our GIS library associate and also using some of the sources and places that we have in the library. Rita also used specific databases and specific sources that were tied to their research. We noted that there was an excellent data analysis and that their research clearly articulates their methodology and uses equations, which I could not understand, but I trust are the best equations out there. Rita also had 101 cited sources, including 88 journal articles, 7 reports, and a good synthesis of citations for this. I'm going to pass this off to you so that you can bring Rita in. And
all right. Thank you for the kind introduction and for honoring me with this award. I am truly honored to be here and to present my doctoral research. So I'll be presenting a little bit on the first chapter of my dissertation, which is where I'm trying to look at the impact of pollution on labor supply in Bangladesh. And to just start off and give a brief introduction and place my research question, I would start with how pollution is becoming an increasingly relevant topic, and how globally we see that nearly 99% of the population breathes air containing pollutants that exceed the safety thresholds recommended by the World Health Organization. And more specifically, Bangladesh is considered to be the most polluted country in the world. And according to the latest estimates in 2023, we see that pollution was responsible for nearly 102,000 deaths and around 262 million lost workdays annually due to pollution-related diseases. So in this sense, I situate my research question where I'm trying to look at the impact of pollution on labor supply in rural Bangladesh. And then the second part of my research question looks at the impact of policy legislation which was passed in the country, the Brick Control Act in 2013, and whether it was successful in reducing pollution levels and indirectly affecting the labor supply or the labor market outcomes in the country. So just to give a very brief idea of what I'm doing in my paper, I am exploiting thermal inversions as an exogenous shock and utilizing them as an instrumental variable because there's endogeneity present in pollution. Because we see that individuals do relocate to areas having a better air quality, but then it is also the case that areas having higher economic activity are areas which do attract highly skilled employees, and these are also areas which have worse air quality. So in that sense, the direction of pollution is very ambiguous, because of which, in order to estimate the impact of pollution, it is necessary to exploit an exogenous shock. So here I'm using thermal inversions. And what are thermal inversions? This is basically when cold air gets trapped below hot air, and it traps the pollutants, because of which there's a high positive correlation between thermal inversions and pollution levels. And because this meteorological phenomena occurs randomly in nature and it's very short term, it is not correlated with economic activities or labor market outcomes, because of which it satisfies the exclusion restriction of the instrumental variable and the relevance and validity criteria, because of which I'm utilizing this as an IV in my regression framework. And then to summarize my results, I find that a 10 microgram per cubic meter increase in pollution levels lead to around an hour fall in weekly working hours. And then on average, this results in around 5% decrease in hours worked by workers in rural areas of the country. And then I also try to see whether the act was successful in reducing pollution. And here I find that on average, pollution levels fall by around 30% within the country, which is considerable and a very significant percentage. And when I try to use my estimates of reduced pollution in order to see whether this has led to increased working hours and improved labor market outcomes in the country, I do see that yes, this has translated to an increase of around 3 to 3.5 more hours worked per week. And then here on the right-hand side, I do plot I plot my data set and the rural workers both before the imposition of the act, which is on the left-hand side. So this is 2012. And then on the right-hand side, I plot the average pollution levels after the imposition of the act. And the size of the circles represent the average pollution levels per union level. And here I see that on the left-hand side, before the act was implemented, I do see that the circles are bigger. So the average pollution levels per union are also higher, and they are much more concentrated. But when we move to the map, which is constructed after the imposition of the act, I do see that the circles become smaller. So especially if you look at the northeastern part of, or the northeastern divisions of the country, I do see that the circles have become smaller, which are representative of average pollution levels falling after the imposition of the act. I do also conduct a heterogeneity analysis, and I try to also translate the impact of the policy, and this I can quickly summarize. So I do see that there is spatial heterogeneity present in my estimates, And here I see that areas where there was higher pollution, I do see that their workers decreased their working hours by more. So 10 microgram per cubic meter increase in pollution led to workers working 5 hours per week less in Rajshahi and around 3 hours less in Khulna. And then also by job type, I see that wage laborers work around 2 hours less because of increased pollution, while farmers work an hour less per week. And then by policy impact, once the act has been passed, I do see that because pollution has reduced, there has been an increase in around 10 hours work per week in Rajshahi division and 14 hours work per week in Khulna. I'll skip the job type because I'm running late on time. But in terms of policy implication, what my research finds is that air quality regulations are very critical for mitigating productivity losses and economic damages within a country. And then it is very important to address pollution because it does lead to significant economic benefits within the country, especially for the research group that I'm looking at. So especially for vulnerable labor groups located in the rural areas of the country, it is very important to see how pollution impacts them, and any legislation that is passed, it is important to look at how this particular sector is also impacted by the legislation. And then lastly, I'll quickly summarize how library resources have been helpful. So in terms of literature support, when I started out with my research, I think it was really fundamental for me to go through econ-led database and to see all the journal and review articles, as well as dissertations, both of my seniors, as well as of students in other doctoral candidates in other universities who were working on similar topics, as well as library tutorials and resources, which helped me really frame and narrow down the literature review and how to structure it well. And then secondly, the resource that helped me and really pushed me to actually pursue this topic was the Geospatial Research Lab. And here I'd really like to thank Dr. Breen, who was amazing in providing support to me with respect to ArcGIS Pro and Python, especially with the type of data sets I've worked for both pollution and thermal inversions here. And her support and her guidance has been truly fundamental in me helping me, work on this research and to take it further. And then in terms of research management, Zotero was something that I learned when I came here. And this really helped me organize my papers and my research and to, produce annotated bibliographies. And lastly, I'm currently working on the dissertation template, which is provided by the library. And this is also really helpful because it provides a really good framework for me to follow along and to situate my dissertation chapters in this template. And lastly, I would just conclude by saying that I'm really grateful for to the library for facilitating me with this award. And my research has greatly benefited from all the support and guidance I have received, and it would not have been possible to come this far without their support. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rita. I'm going to configure things to go back to our slideshow, and then we'll introduce the last award.
Hi all, I'm Donna Feminella. I manage the course reserves in the Makerspace here at the library. It's my pleasure to introduce the recipient of this year's Library Curiosity and Innovation Makerspace Award. Similar to the Graduate Research Paper Award, this is the first year, so it's really exciting to have you and to share this with you all. This award celebrates the innovative spirits of students who make use of our library's resources and tools to fuel creative, engaging, and meaningful projects. Flynn Gray's project, T4T, Halloween, adapting animated series into gender-affirming fashion, bridges critical queer theory and film theory with hands-on craftsmanship. Utilizing the sewing machine and learning different techniques and tools, Flynn designed and created complex, customized costumes based on characters from She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Flynn's project is more than just a costume. It's a deeply personal, academic, and community-driven endeavor. It shows how library resources can empower students to transform theory into tangible, affirming realities. Please join me in welcoming up Flynn Gray, our winner.
Hi all, thank you to Donna and the Makerspace and the whole library staff. I will start off by saying I do not like movies. as my cinema professor, Jeffrey Middens, from freshman year knows. But he's conveniently seated there. But I do need to start off with a quote from a movie. Perhaps the best movie of all time. Mean Girls' Katie Heron says that Halloween is the one night a year when a girl can dress like a, well, I'm not going to finish it right now. But I'll say that for queer people, especially gender nonconforming queer people, Halloween is the one night a year where you can dress like anything you want to, and you're met with community instead of individualized resistance. Now, way before Halloween this past fall, I met and started dating my current partner. And I'm transgender, and they told me that they weren't a boy, a girl, or anything else. And I was like, that's fine, that's cool. But that's entirely outside of my wheelhouse. And so I started doing what I know best. I started researching, and I came across T4T theory, which is trans living trans theory. And I looked more into it, and I find that for as many benefits as it has, which allows trans people to explore their relationships with one another and get grounded in their identities, it can lead to isolation from the broader community, especially the broader queer community, and from other relationships with individuals. At the same time as I was doing my reading, my partner and I started watching the animated series She-Ra, The Princesses of Power on Netflix. This is a revival from the 1980s She-Ra He-Man universe. And in the show, it features androgynous characters, queer relationships, and a whole variety and a whole world. Interestingly enough, it's marketed at kids. I did feel a little bit odd watching a kids show, but I was like, this is better than a movie, so I can make it work. And as I was looking into it, I decided to look more into the theories behind the show, because having seen that it was a queer show marketed towards kids, I hadn't seen anything like this before. I looked more into queer cinema theory and queer media theory as a whole. And I found that while it's like widely celebrated and while queer media helps provide community, the real community impact comes from like online forums and actual interactions between individuals. And that media and relationship theory can only go so far. So with Halloween approaching and my options running out for costumes becoming very limited, I decided that the best way for me to engage with my relationship and with the broader queer community was to take the intangible and make it tangible. That's where I pivoted to the library makerspace. I have never owned my own sewing machine, but I have been sewing since I was age 3, taught by my grandma. And starting sewing from age 3, I've never sewn any clothing before. So I went to the library makerspace, saw a wide variety of resources there, and I realized that this is exactly what I needed to do, both for my younger self and for the self I am today. I biked 30 miles round trip to Falls Church, Virginia, to the Joann's, which has since gone out of business. And I found 8 different fabric types. I decided I had my work cut out for me and decided to make each part of the costume in a different type of fabric, sewing and combining different fabrics so I could learn as many manipulation techniques as possible within the span of one project. The library makerspace was invaluable to me. Little do you know, you have to have special scissors for cutting fabric, which I do not have. Luckily, the library makerspace has these scissors. And it had dress forms and a bunch of different materials for me to be able to make my costumes. And while I do not have a slideshow with my costumes on them, I do have pictures on my phone, and I would be happy to show you. But on the night of Halloween, at a big state school that I went to go visit my partner at, I was met with, oh my gosh, those are the costumes from She-Ra, you're Catra, you're Adora from She-Ra. And without even having to bring myself out there, put myself out there, which I so often have to do, and so does my partner, we were met with community, which was the exact impact of my project.
Just a few closing remarks. I'd like to give another thanks to those who have supported these awards, and a warm congratulations to all of our winners. For our honorees, you'll be picking up your awards in the other room, and we'll also be getting a group photo of y'all. And finally, thank you all for attending. I hope you can stay and chat and enjoy some refreshments. Thanks, everyone.